Crescent Falls was the kind of quiet Midwestern town where everyone looked out for one another, an idyllic setting that seemed impervious to the chaos and violence of the outside world. Tucked away between forested hills and meandering streams, it had a population of just under 3,000 residents, many of them descendants of generations of farmers and small business owners. The town's single traffic light in the historic downtown flickered at night, casting shifting shadows across the storefronts shut tight after sundown. Yet, beneath that postcard-perfect facade, nightmares were brewing. It started innocently enough as a missing person case. People in Crescent Falls were well acquainted with each other's routines, so when 22-year-old Elena Price disappeared suddenly, the entire town sensed that something was off. She was one of those cheerful individuals who left an impression wherever she went, always flashing a smile when she served customers as a waitress at the local diner, fervently volunteering at the municipal library, and singing in the community choir on Sunday mornings. Elena Price did not simply vanish. The day Elena disappeared was a hot summer Monday. Mercury soared close to 90 degrees, and the air smelled of freshly cut grass and sticky leftover barbecue from the weekend. Elena was last seen leaving the Wild Clover Café, sweaty from her shift, apron draped over her arm. She gave a friendly wave to Mr. Anderson, the old farmer who mulled around in front of the café each afternoon, sipping sweet tea and watching the world go by. According to Mr. Anderson, nothing appeared unusual. Elena had even mentioned she was going to head home for a quick nap before choir rehearsal that night. She never arrived. When the Price family realized Elena had not returned that evening, they figured she might still be at the church practicing for a special performance. However, a quick phone call to the choir director told them that Elena was not there. Concern soon curdled into dread, after multiple calls to her cell phone went unanswered. By 9 o'clock that night, the police were notified. Tasked with leading the search was Detective Miriam Cross, a 10-year veteran with the local precinct who had a stellar record of diligently cracking small-town mysteries. A calm presence, with a stern face that belied a deep empathy, Miriam took an almost maternal role in the community whenever trouble arose. In Crescent Falls, missing person cases were rare, and they typically had quick resolutions, often young people who left knowingly in search of bigger cities or simply forgot to tell their families about spontaneous weekend adventures. This time, though, something just felt off. Elena was not the type to leave without telling anyone. She was deeply rooted in the community and had a beaming future ahead, with plans to attend a state university in the fall. As the hours turned into days, Miriam started to fear the worst. The police scoured the area. Volunteers formed search parties, combing local woods and farmland, looking in ditches and behind barns. Posters with Elena's face were plastered all over downtown, on church bulletin boards, in stores, and online. Even the local news station, WFCT Channel 7, put her picture on constant rotation. There was no sign of her, or her battered blue sedan, anywhere in or around Crescent Falls. The initial hope that Elena's disappearance might have been a misunderstanding started to wane. Rumors, that intangible small-town currency, began swirling. Some whispered that Elena had gotten involved with a much older man from out of town. Others speculated that she had hidden a pregnancy from her deeply religious family and run away in secret. Still others whispered about a shadowy figure who'd been lurking outside the Wild Clover Café for the last couple of weeks. Everyone was guessing. No one had answers. As the days dragged on, Elena's mother, Angela Price, grew visibly gaunt with worry. She took to pacing the front porch day and night, scanning the road for any sign of her daughter's car. Meanwhile, her father, Timothy Price, tried to remain stoic, but cracks showed in every trembling breath. He was a devout man who believed in the uniting power of community, so every time he saw another missing person poster, another half-hearted attempt at comfort, another solemn vigil candle flickering in the night, he only grew more aware that the entire town was powerless without a lead. On the 7th day after Elena's disappearance, hope began to crumble into tragic reality. A highway patrol officer spotted a car matching Elena's vehicle description abandoned along a seldom-traveled dirt road roughly 15 miles outside Crescent Falls. Under the blazing midday sun, the dusted trunk of the sedan sat ajar. Nobody was around. When Detective Miriam Cross arrived on scene, her heart sank into her stomach. There, half buried in a shallow ditch near the car, was a black trash bag. Dark stains seeped through the plastic. Miriam silently approached, a gloved hand trembling as she carefully tore open the bag. The remains inside were horrifyingly disfigured. Identification would require an autopsy and, most likely, dental records. But the length of the hair and the clothing scraps were consistent with Elena's description. For Miriam, it was a nightmare made real. This was no longer just a missing persons case, but a homicide investigation. The once genteel aura of Crescent Falls was abruptly tarnished by the stench of brutal violence. The sun continued to glare down as crime scene personnel arrived, photographing footprints, tire tracks, and broken glass. Red tape sectioned off the area, warding away curious bystanders who had come to gather, hoping to confirm or deny the worst. Finally, the medical examiner confirmed that the remains indeed belonged to Elena Price. The town reeled. Flags flew at half-staff in silent tribute to a brilliant light suddenly extinguished. People wore black ribbons around their arms, pinned to their lapels, or tied to their mailbox flags. Daily prayer vigils formed outside the local church, candlelight dancing among tears. Detective Miriam Cross, stoic though she usually was, found herself weeping late at night in the precinct, the last person in the building, as she pored over files and tried to figure out how something so atrocious could happen in a place she devoted her life to protecting. The severity of Elena's murder prompted the local department to call in assistance from the nearby State Police Forensic Division. What they found was worse than anyone anticipated. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. But that was only the tip of a tragic iceberg. There were signs of torture. The brutality pointed to a crime rooted in personal rage or sadistic impulses. Detective Cross and her newly formed team tried to piece together Elena's final hours. They uncovered a piece of evidence that hadn't been made public yet. A small slip of cloth found clenched in her hand. The pattern on the cloth was distinct pink stripes with a darker maroon swirl. It looked oddly like a fragment from one of the decorative scarves older folks sometimes wore around their heads or necks. An uncommon style, sure, but nothing that gave them a concrete suspect. Cursory checks on Elena's phone records indicated that she last spoke to someone at 2:14 p.m., a call lasting only 1 minute. That person happened to be a colleague from the Café, Jeremy Carter, an earnest young man who'd recently moved to Crescent Falls from a bigger city. Police interviewed Jeremy, who insisted it was a short conversation about helping Elena close out her shift. He had an airtight alibi for the rest of the day, verified by multiple coworkers and security footage at a car wash, where he had his vehicle cleaned after work. So, Jeremy was quickly ruled out. As the days turned into weeks, Detective Cross remained vigilant, though leads seemed to dry up. She latched onto the idea that the killer might not be local. Perhaps a trucker or transient passing through recognized Elena's kindness as an opportunity to lure her into a deadly situation. There was little evidence to go on, but the brutality of the crime made Cross suspect an individual with a history of violence. A turning point came from an unlikely place: the library. Angela Price, in an attempt to find solace in the places Elena had loved, started organizing her daughter's volunteering schedule. She found a daily planner stuffed in Elena's locker inside the library's small storeroom. Meticulous notes filled every line, from the time of her next choir rehearsal to the groceries she planned to pick up. However, on the date of her disappearance, there was a single, hastily scribbled note. 2 p.m. meet X. R? Detective Cross scrutinized the note. Who was X? And what did R mean? A rendezvous? A reference to a location? A clue? The question marks were maddening. The next step was to interview the librarians, volunteers, and anyone who might have seen Elena writing in that planner. Yet no one recalled seeing the mysterious note or overhearing Elena talk about a suspicious meeting. But the puzzle pieces were slowly starting to click. Elena disappeared around 2 p.m., minutes after finishing her shift. That lined up with the note in her planner. She left the cafe, presumably to meet someone. If so, who was it? More importantly, why had they asked for secrecy? The small-town tranquility of Crescent Falls disintegrated so thoroughly that neighbors started installing security cameras on their porches and businesses, extended their closing times to intentionally avoid leaving employees alone after dark. Women formed carpools for daily errands, and parents no longer let their children walk to the school bus stop by themselves. Anxiety attacked from every direction, and the rumor mill churned at full speed. People pointed fingers at odd recluses, at new arrivals like Jeremy Carter, or at rumored drifters who might have strayed from the highways. Detective Miriam Cross received harrowing tips. She interviewed anyone who had so much as cast a suspicious glance at Elena over the last few months. She re-examined the short list of local criminals with violent histories. None of it led anywhere. Meanwhile, the media attention reached far beyond Crescent Falls, bringing in a surge of amateur internet sleuths who speculated on niche online forums or bombarded the precinct with wild theories. In the midst of this, local politician and city council member Bennett Stark used the tragedy to push for more funding for the police department. Some cynics claimed that he was merely capitalizing on the situation for personal gain, whispering that he'd harbored ambitions to run for state office, but to many, it seemed a necessary step. After all, if a killer went undiscovered, who knew what devastation might come next? An unexpected lead arrived when a store clerk from a neighboring town recognized a partial description of Elena's clothes. He recalled seeing her with a man just an hour before she was reported missing. The pair had been in the hardware store buying a small roll of rope and duct tape items that could be innocently used for home projects, or, as the detective realized, items that could easily be used to restrain someone. The clerk provided security footage. Detective Cross felt her adrenaline spike as she watched the grainy video. The footage showed a petite brunette who could easily be Elena, albeit wearing sunglasses and an unfamiliar baseball cap. She seemed uneasy, glancing over her shoulder. The man at her side was obscured by his own baseball cap and wore a bandana around his neck. His face was angled away from the camera. The more Cross replayed it, the more she believed that the woman's mannerisms, her stance, slight nervous fidget with her left hand resembled Elena. Yet the man's face was hidden. She tried to make out the pattern on his bandana or the lettering on his cap, but the poor quality of the footage blocked any definitive identification. She enlisted the help of the state forensic team to enhance the video, hoping for a stroke of luck. After the footage was somewhat enhanced, they managed to see that the baseball cap displayed a faint logo. GCI, a local trucking company that ran distribution routes through the region. Detective Cross started there and found that GCI employed dozens of drivers who frequently passed through Crescent Falls. It was a place often used as a rest stop or shortcut for some of their routes. She singled out the employees who had any prior convictions. A handful of names emerged. At the top of that short list was one Harvey Dunn. Harvey Dunn was a 48-year-old father of two who lived in a nearby town. He had a history of domestic violence, though never convicted. The charges had been dropped after his ex-wife moved out of state. Looking closer, Detective Cross discovered that the ex-wife had taken a restraining order on him once. Over the years, he racked up minor charges: public disturbance, resisting an officer, and driving under the influence. Not enough to put him away, but enough to raise eyebrows. And somewhat alarmingly, when Cross attempted to locate him, she found that he had taken an indefinite leave from GCI just days before Elena's disappearance. Cross tried to gather more information about Dunn. She found no digital footprint worth exploring, no social media, minimal online presence. She turned to the people who worked with him. Some said he was a quiet but friendly guy, while others said he had a dangerous temper if triggered. But no one could recall him talking about Elena. Then, a chance question changed everything. One coworker remembered seeing him wear a personally designed bright pink striped bandana on the job, something he claimed was lucky. Detective Cross felt her pulse thrum. The piece of cloth found clutched in Elena's hand had pink stripes. If this bandana matched that cloth fragment, everything would come crashing together. But to confirm it, they needed to locate Harvey Dunn and test the cloth for a DNA match. Yet Dunn had vanished. Officially, he was on unpaid leave, and no one knew his whereabouts, not even his children, who lived with his ex-wife in another state. He had no current address, and the phone number on file had long since been disconnected. Cross issued a bolo, "Be on the lookout," for Harvey Dunn, and requested help from neighboring precincts. Tensions in Crescent Falls soared. The general consensus was that a killer was still on the loose, with many believing Dunn was the prime suspect and possibly roving through small towns. Some families retreated to stay with relatives in bigger cities, while others decided to arm themselves. The mysterious letter? Barely 2 weeks after Elena's funeral, a letter arrived at the Price household. The envelope had no return address. Postmarked from a town only half an hour away, the letter contained a single wrinkled sheet of lined paper. Written in black ink was an unsettling, confession-like statement. "I never meant for things to go that far. I only wanted to scare her. Something snapped. I can't return to that place. They'll never understand. I'm sorry. X." The Price family was dumbfounded. They handed the letter over to Detective Cross immediately. Angela Price recognized the final line, "I'm sorry," as something her daughter might have accepted wholeheartedly if she were still alive. Now it was just hollow. Forensic analysis on the envelope discovered only partial prints, not enough for a conclusive match. The handwriting gave them nothing beyond a likely male's style of penmanship, according to a forensic handwriting specialist. Cross had the letter tested for DNA traces. In the corner of the paper, the lab found a smudge of saliva. They matched that DNA to samples found in Elena's car, which had also tested positive for an unknown male's saliva on the steering wheel and gear shift. The match was conclusive. The letter's writer was the same man who had likely been inside her vehicle. Now, armed with this new evidence, Detective Cross found a potential partial match in the national database. It wasn't a full profile, but it connected loosely. Harvey Dunn had once been forced to provide a DNA sample in a domestic assault case. The results were never fully processed, or were incomplete at the time. A partial match with only a handful of markers. It wasn't bulletproof, but it was enough to bolster the suspicion that Dunn was indeed X, the man who had ended Elena's life, and now wrote an eerily remorseful letter. As pressure mounted, local newspapers covered the story with daily updates. The phone at the police station rang incessantly with sightings of Harvey Dunn. Most were false leads. Someone spotted a man in a baseball cap at the gas station, or a traveler with a pink bandana at a rest stop 5 counties over. But Detective Cross insisted on chasing those leads anyway. The entire department shared her obsession with bringing justice to Elena's family. Finally, a breakthrough. A routine check of highway motels in the region uncovered surveillance footage from the Sagebrush Motella, dilapidated, out-of-the-way spot near a truck stop. The grainy film from a security camera captured a man who looked remarkably similar to Dunn checking in under a false name. The timestamp indicated the visit occurred 3 days after Elena's murder. He stayed in room 16 for 2 nights, then left abruptly. Detective Cross rushed to the motel with a forensic team. The room was vacant, but they discovered signs that someone had been there. A half-eaten pizza, a crumpled GCI trucking schedule, and crucially, scraps of pink-striped fabric near the bathroom sink. Someone had sloppily tried to flush them, but they got caught in the drain. It was the final piece of the puzzle, a near-certain match to the cloth found with Elena. The worthless attempt to destroy evidence had ironically provided just what the authorities needed. With that discovery, the police escalated their manhunt for Harvey Dunn. His description blanketed every state line, local television station, and highway sign. Mid to late 40s. 5'11". Approximately 200 pounds. Receding brown hair. Known to wear a pink-striped bandana or baseball cap with the GCI logo. An alias used to check into motels included H. Dean or H. Dunning. The FBI joined in, seeing the possibilities of him crossing state lines. Desperate for resolution, the police accepted any credible help offered, even from unconventional sources. That's when a surprising call came in from a spiritual retreat center outside Crescent Falls. A staff member named Betty Larson claimed that Harvey Dunn might have passed through there. Betty recalled a twitchy man with sadness in his eyes who arrived unannounced and left the following day, leaving behind a note on his bunk. This note read similarly to the letter sent to the Prices, referencing regret and an inability to sleep properly. Cross drove to the retreat center, half expecting to find nothing. But Betty took her to a secluded garden where the visitor had spent an afternoon pacing in circles. Buried beneath a stone near the garden's entrance was a second note, perhaps tossed aside in haste. This one was water-damaged from the sprinklers, but enough words were legible to confirm it was in the same handwriting. The note read, "Heaven can't forgive me. I need an escape. She didn't deserve that." Detective Cross was about to dismiss the retreat center as another dead end. Then Betty mentioned that the man asked specifically about a place called Coolidge Bluff, an old scenic overlook about 50 miles from Crescent Falls. A deserted space with steep drop-offs, known for its dangerous winding roads and gorgeous vistas. If Harvey Dunn was on the run and tormented by guilt, might he have gone there to hide or, possibly, end his own life? Cross had no time to waste. She rounded up a small tactical team and headed to Coolidge Bluff at dawn. The unpaved roads were treacherous, cutting through dense forest land. They navigated carefully, radio crackling with tension. As they neared the bluff, the rising sun cast shifting gold rays through the pines, illuminating patches of rocky outcroppings. At the final turn they saw it, Dunn's pickup truck caked with dust and partially concealed behind tall brush. Slowly, Detective Cross and 2 officers advanced on foot, guns drawn but hoping for a surrender. The forest's morning hush was punctured by the crunch of their boots on pine needles. Suddenly, they spotted him perched near the edge of a high cliff. He was wearing that same pink-striped bandana. His clothes were dirty, disheveled, and his face contorted in an expression of anguish. Detective Cross called out, "Harvey, we need to talk." He turned to face her. A flash of fear passed across his eyes. Then he inched closer to the cliff edge, pebbles tumbling into the yawning abyss. For a tense minute it seemed like he might jump. In the cautious stillness that followed, Cross stepped forward, speaking softly. She told him he didn't have to end it, that Elena Price deserved justice, and that if he really felt the remorse he'd claimed in his letters, he should start by telling the truth. Dunn's face crumpled as tears mixed with sweat. He sank to his knees, shoulders heaving. The pink-striped bandana fluttered away in an early morning breeze, drifting over the cliff's rim. The officers quickly moved in and subdued him before he could change his mind. Cuffed and sobbing, Harvey Dunn was escorted back to the waiting cruiser. In the interrogation room, Dunn's initial silence spoke volumes. He wrung his hands, stared at the floor, and exhaled ragged breaths. Detective Cross and a fellow detective from the state police took turns trying to coax details out of him. Gradually, through fits of tears and trembling confessions, an appalling story emerged. Dunn had been driving through Crescent Falls on a short work trip for GCI. He said he'd met Elena briefly at the Wild Clover Café about a month before her death. At the time, Elena served him coffee and made small talk. He became fixated on her kindness, seeing in her an angelic presence he felt unworthy of. Days later, he stopped by after hours and saw her alone, locking up. She recognized him from the earlier conversation, so she politely said hello. Something snapped in him then. An obsession. He began following her around, gleaning details about her life. Through this twisted obsession, he learned her schedule. Dunn became convinced that Elena was taunting him with her perfection, forcing him to confront his own failings and regrets, an internal justification he used to mask a toxic infatuation. The day of the murder, he approached her as she left work. He told her he needed help with something urgent, luring her to drive him to the hardware store. She was hesitant, but he claimed it was an emergency, and, trusting her instincts to help, she allowed him into her car. Once there, his delusions escalated. He coerced her into buying rope and duct tape, lying that it was for a complex project at home. Elena, sensing the abnormality, tried to leave, but by that point, Dunn's madness had taken hold. He directed her to a secluded road, forcibly taking control of the wheel. The next minutes blurred in his mind. Elena screaming, him striking her in panic, a black belt around her wrists. He recalled blacking out at some point, succumbing to a rage fueled by fantasies of control and a twisted sense of self-loathing. By the time he came to, Elena was unconscious, blood staining the car seat, and in a moment of raw horror, he sealed her fate in a shallow ditch. After burying her, he panicked. The rush of guilt came immediately, leading him to abandon the car and flee on foot. The letters he wrote were confessions of a broken man who knew he was running from something inevitable. With the confession in hand, local authorities and the district attorney's office built a formidable case against Harvey Dunn. For the sake of Elena's grieving parents, they pushed for a swift trial. There was no question it would be sensational. The media coverage resumed with renewed gusto, occasionally broadcasting details so graphic that half the town found it difficult to watch. Dunn's defense team attempted to argue diminished capacity, pointing to his history of mental illness, untreated PTSD from childhood, and severe depression. The prosecution, however, contended that while mentally unstable, Dunn had enough clarity to understand his actions, buy incriminating materials, and try to hide the evidence. The pink-striped bandana and his DNA matched at the crime scene provided the final nails in the coffin. During the trial's final week, Elena's father took the stand to deliver a victim impact statement. Timothy Price's voice cracked with sorrow. "You stole her from us. She was our sunshine," he said, looking directly at Dunn, who stared at the floor. "We will never sense her laughter in the house again." Many people in that courtroom, including Detective Cross, struggled not to cry. The jury was out for a mere 5 hours. They found Harvey Dunn guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and a litany of other charges. The judge handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole, an uncommonly severe measure in that state, but a reflection of the sheer brutality of the crime. When the gavel fell, an audible wave of relief washed through the room. Elena's mother, Angela, collapsed into sobs of both heartbreak and closure. People across Crescent Falls breathed easier, happy that the justice system had worked as it should, though no one could ignore the inescapable emptiness left behind by Elena's demise. Detective Miriam Cross felt a dual sense of triumph and sorrow. She had solved the case, seeing it through to the end, but the knowledge that a vibrant life was cut short by an unhinged man's obsession weighed heavily. She maintained a close bond with the Price family in the months and years that followed, finding tiny ways to honor Elena's memory. A scholarship in her name, an annual choir performance dedicated to her, and a commemorative bench outside the Wild Clover Café with a plaque reading, "In loving memory of Elena Price. May her bright smile live on in us all." In the aftermath, Crescent Falls began the slow process of healing. Murals appeared downtown, a portrait of Elena by a local artist, capturing her gentle eyes and that contagious smile. Flowers were placed beneath it daily. The community, once fractured by fear, came together to support the Price family and to ensure no one ever felt as unsafe again. Local lawmakers passed new regulations requiring better camera systems in public establishments, and the church organized a watch program where volunteers patrolled after dark to accompany people to their cars. The case became something of a cautionary tale, highlighting how even the safest-seeming places can hide darkness. True to its resilient spirit, Crescent Falls found a way to move forward. Crime, once minimal, did not vanish altogether, but the heinous edge of such violent acts was tempered by the knowledge that the community would stand united against any threat, internal or external. Elena's story circulated beyond the town's borders, featuring on true crime podcasts, local news shows, and eventually, after the trial's conclusion, a short documentary that included interviews with Detective Cross and the Price family. People marveled at how this seemingly unassuming location could be the backdrop to such a horrific crime. In response, the residents of Crescent Falls tried to keep Elena's memory alive not by dwelling on the horror of her final moments, but by celebrating the warmth and generosity she brought to the community in her short life. Detective Cross went on to become chief of police in Crescent Falls, determined that no tragedy on her watch would ever reach the same scale. She carried Elena's memorial card and her wallet, an emblem of why she did what she did, serving as a daily reminder to protect the vulnerable and watch carefully for the faintest signals of danger. Serving as a daily reminder to protect the vulnerable and watch carefully for the faintest signals of danger. And in so many true crime stories, the resolution can feel hollow next to the irreparable loss of a life. People cling to answers in the face of the unanswerable. Detective Cross saw that in the tearful eyes of Angela and Timothy Price, who, despite having received the justice they sought, would forever carry an unfillable emptiness. Yet, the trial's conclusion provided a measure of peace. The swift sentencing removed a dangerous individual from society, ensuring he could never hurt anyone again. In the year that followed, the Wild Clover Café renamed their signature latte Elena's Smile, with proceeds going to a local scholarship fund in her name. And at the library where Elena volunteered, a new reading program for children was launched each summer, paid for by an anonymous donor, assumed to be the Price family, who made it their mission to ensure that other young people in Crescent Falls could pursue their dreams, just as Elena had once planned for herself. Yes, the haunting events left a permanent mark on the town, but Crescent Falls emerged with a renewed emphasis on vigilance, empathy, and community. In the hush that followed the resolution of the case, you could almost sense Elena's spirit lingering near the diner, the church choir, and the library shelves she once dutifully organized, reminding everyone that love and kindness, while fragile, could endure even the most horrific of circumstances. From the perspective of the outside world, people would see Crescent Falls on a map and wonder how such a small dot could hold such a big story of heartbreak and resilience. But for those who lived there, the place was now a testament to the preciousness of life, a reminder never to take safety or normalcy for granted. The police department offered free self-defense classes, local citizens remained attuned to potential threats, and daily acts of kindness became the greatest weapon against the lingering shadow of the tragedy. Life went on, but Elena Price's name would never be forgotten. In every corner of Crescent Falls lay echoes of her memory, from the weekly readings at the library to the gentle hush of the restaurant at closing time. The bench outside the Wild Clover still welcomes people needing a moment of rest. In the end, justice, though bittersweet, found its way to the quiet roads and countryside of Crescent Falls. Elena's murder, as devastating as it was, awakened a sense of collective compassion and vigilance. Her story remains a cautionary tale that underscores how easily darkness can slip into the lives of the unsuspecting. but it also leaves us with a final, lingering note. If a community stands together and refuses to bow to fear, healing and even hope can still blossom. Thank you for sharing in this journey with us. For more thorough explorations of lesser-known cases and to continue unraveling the dark corners of true crime, please subscribe to our channel, True Crime Atlas. Your support helps us continue to shed light on the stories the world needs to hear.